Hi, my name is Ricardo Wyngaard, and in this video I want to talk about the report on the commercialization of religion. Now, it's quite an important issue, and while I'm doing this video, the report is out for public comment. I think it's important for the public to comment on it, and this video is aimed at facilitating that process of public comment. Now, I've got 5 questions that I think are important. Now, I must say at the outset that I have not done a detailed analysis of the report. I've read through the report, and these are the 5 questions that I think are important. Of course, it's not a complete list of questions that you can ask of the report, and this is a very brief video, and I hope it's helpful. So, the first question: what is being investigated? Now, the report is clear. The investigation is focused on the commercialization of religion. Now, I'm thinking if we're looking at that particular topic, then we need to define what we are looking at. So the report is saying at the beginning that it's looking at investigating and understanding this concept of the commercialization of religion. And then also it's looking at the extent it's taking place in South Africa, and then it's making recommendations as to what should be done regarding the commercialization of religion. But I thought, there was a glaring omission in the report, in that there's no definition for what is commercialization of religion. No definition. There's a discussion at some point, but the report does not offer any definition. And I'm just concerned that, if you're investigating, if you want to make recommendations on this report, then we need to understand what is meant by the commercialization of religion. Does it refer to the business activities of religious organization? Does it refer to the value of the products that are being sold, or the services that are sold in the name of religion? Are we referring to separate entities? It's not quite clear to me. And one of the persons at the focus group discussions actually said there are positive aspects of commercial in religion, and there are negative aspects. And I think that's important. It's especially important in the context where there's a lot of pressure on organizations, non-profits, to operate like they're commercial entities, like they're businesses, which is a bit confusing, because if some of them start to operate like businesses, now the questions are being asked. Now, I can accept that it's not perhaps focused on legitimate business operations, but the point is, the report, because it's investigating this issue, it should at least be clear on what is the definition for commercialized religion. Have the right questions been asked to the right people? When I look at some of the questions that have been asked to the respondents, I'm a bit concerned. It's clear from the report that most of the respondents were from non-profit organizations. Now, yet one of the key questions concerns the issue of ownership within non-profit organizations. Now, in my mind, the issue of non-profits and ownership, they don't go together. There's no ownership. There's no private ownership within non-profit organizations. So that question is, for the most part, not applicable to the respondents. I saw there are some that are saying they're from cooperatives, but when it comes to non-profit organization, you don't really deal with owners. There are no shareholders in the organization. One of the other questions related to the issue of tax, and it basically asked the question: is my organization registered with SARS? Now, that question is a bit confusing, because a religious institution can register as a taxpayer but it can apply for the tax benefits, and to do so it must become an approved public benefit organization. So it doesn't receive a tax exemption certificate, it receives a PBO approval letter. Now, it's important to understand that because there are implications for being an approved public benefit organization, which we're going to deal with in the next question. Other questions that are, I think could have been phrased differently, refers to the audited financial statements. Now, it asks the question as if all non-profit organizations are required to have audited financial statements, and that's actually not correct. The NPO Act allows for a report certified by an accountant. The Trust Property Control Act does not in itself require audited financial statements, and likewise the Companies Act only in exceptional cases require audited financial statements. So the question that's been posed to the respondents as if it's applicable to all religious institutions is not quite correct. And then interestingly, it asks the question as to whether organizations, religious organizations, prepare annual business plans. Now, it's in the context that it's almost presented as a good practice to have annual business plans. Now, if you've got an annual business plan, what are you going to do? You're going to do business for the next year. But the problem is investigating the commercialization of religion. So that's why it's important to define what we mean by commercialization of religion. Is there a proper understanding of the context within which the study has been conducted? To me, it is not that evident. For example, most of the respondents are saying, according to my understanding, that they are registered in terms of the Non-Profit Organizations Act. Now, one of the recommendations is that registration should be compulsory, which is, I don't understand that recommendation if most of the organizations are in any case registered. But then the reasoning seems to be that registration will lead to increased compliance. The reality today is very different. The NPO Directorate will tell you that there's a lot of non-compliance with registered organizations. That's one of the biggest challenges at the NPO Directorate at the moment. So the issue is not the lack of registration. One of the challenges is the lack of compliance once registered. So the recommendation that organizations must be registered is not quite an effective recommendation in my view. Also, I'm not sure if the implications of the Income Tax Act is understood correctly, because for approved public benefit organizations, they are allowed to a certain extent to do business activities. That's recognized under the Companies Act. In fact, the South African Revenue Service has prepared quite a lengthy document explaining the implication of partial trading activities for approved public benefit organizations. It seems none of that is mentioned in this report. Some of the recommendations are saying that once an organization starts to do business, it must do it in a separate entity. That recommendation is not consistent with what's already covered in the Income Tax Act. So I would suggest the drafters of this report should look at those provisions in the Income Tax Act and to see what are the implications, because clearly that recommendation is not consistent with what's currently in the legislation. In fact, having read the report, I'm hesitant to conclude that there's sufficient evidence to suggest that there's a large-scale problem of commercialization of religion in South Africa. I don't know if there is or if there's not. All I'm saying is that the report does not substantiate that claim. It's not evident from the replies that were received from the respondents. Also, it's not evident from the discussions at focus group meetings that were held. So that's a question that we should all deal with, and I think it's important for the religious sector and also for non-profits to engage with the process, to make submissions after you have reviewed the report and see, if you agree or if you disagree with some of the issues mentioned. And I think it's also important for non-profit organizations in the religious sector to focus on their governance issues and legal compliance. Some of the responses that were received from the respondents are not encouraging. It appears that there's a lack of understanding in terms of the applicable legislation and governance standards required. And I think it's important, if at least one of the positive aspects out of the report is to improve governance and to eliminate these criminal elements, then that will be positive. But it appears to me that the report has not sufficiently engaged with the issue at hand, and the idea is not to criticize the authors, but if you come up with recommendations, we have to unpack the recommendations to determine if it's suitable in the context, and I'm not sure if it is.